It's been 40 years since the overthrow of the Shah of Iran, which saw his government replaced with an Islamic Republic. On Talk to Al Jazeera, we speak to a former foreign minister, ambassador to the United Nations, and a leading voice on the principles of the Islamic Republic. Dr. Kamal Kharazi was also a military spokesman during the Iran-Iraq war, with a central role in Iranian state media. Kharazi is now chairman of Iran's Strategic Council for Foreign Relations and the foreign policy advisor to the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. So 40 years on, has the revolution achieved its goals? And how is Iran overcoming the challenges of the US withdrawal from the nuclear disarmament deal, tougher sanctions, and heightened military tensions in the region? Dr. Kamal Kharazi talks to Al Jazeera. Dr. Kamal Kharazi, advisor to Iran's supreme leader on foreign policy and former minister of foreign affairs, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Quite welcome.
As Iran marks 40 years since the 1979 revolution, it also recently unveiled a ballistic missile. Now, the US has come out and said it will remain relentless in pressuring Iran to deter its missile program. We know that relations with the United States are described by some at an all-time low, and the nuclear agreement, of which the US has pulled out of, some are saying, is hanging by a thread. Why would Iran unveil a ballistic missile now?
There are many enemies, and they have all kinds of armaments, including Air Force, very sophisticated jet fighters. We had no choice but to develop our missile technology to defend ourselves.
But even the European Union said earlier this month that it was gravely concerned by Iran's ballistic missile launches and that Iran continues to undertake efforts to increase the range and precision of its missiles, together with increasing the number of tests and operational launches. So even the Europeans, who are considered your allies and partners in this nuclear agreement, are concerned.
Yeah, but there is no justification for that, because according to Resolution 2331, designing missiles which are going to carry nuclear warhead are prohibited, but not other kinds of missiles. In terms of the range of missiles, we have decided to have up to 2,000 kilometers.
So what you're saying is Iran is not violating the nuclear agreement?
Exactly.
But when the EU says that it's actually calling, in a statement, it's calling upon Iran to refrain from these activities that deepen mistrust and destabilize the region, are you discounting that statement by the EU?
Exactly, sure. What is destabilizing the region? Who is destabilizing the region? Those who are interfering.
The EU says that Iran is with their missile technology.
That is what they claim. But in fact, those who have developed terrorist groups and have tried to topple down the existing governments, those are the bodies who have destabilized the region. We have tried to keep a status quo by fighting against terrorism in Iraq and Syria, which were defeated by the help of Iran. And therefore, Iran has been a stabilizing factor, not de-stabilizing factor. You know, European countries have to say that why they are selling so much arms to Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and to Israel. Why? While they are selling arms to those countries, Iran has the right to develop its own armaments, including missile technology.
But is the JCPOA at risk of dissolving with these activities on behalf of Iran?
It's the pressure from Americans on European countries to not do business with Iran. That is making JCPOA a useless instrument.
Well, the Europeans have said that the GCPOA can exist without the United States. And now, as you know, they've come up with a concept called a special purpose vehicle to help facilitate trade with Iran. But is this special purpose vehicle ultimately going to fail, in your opinion? Because Washington is saying that if Europe tries to go around US sanctions that have been recently imposed, then they will be subject to fines and penalties.
Yeah, that all depends on the decision of the European countries, that if they want to show their independence against the pressures of Americans or not. So far, unfortunately, they have not been committed. You know, they were supposed to have normal relations with Iran in terms of banking relations, trade and business, investment in Iran, but nothing has happened.
Are Iranian European relations at risk of unraveling, specifically after recent accusations by the Europeans that Iran has been behind assassination attempts on European soil in 2018, as you know? That's according to the Dutch government, for one, as well as the French government.
These are accusations. One has to look to it that or if there are any substantiation to that. Some people have claimed that this is the case, but Iran is not doing anything against European security. We have some good relations with some European countries, but it is unfortunate that European countries have their own problems with the United States. And Mr. Trump is putting a lot of pressure on European countries. In fact, United States is against the existence of European Union. It's trying its best to destabilize the European Union as an entity. And therefore, they have their own problems with the United States. And if you sit with them and talk to them, you can find that any individual country in the European countries have problem with the policies of the United States.
So far, Iran has said that it is willing to stay in the nuclear deal. Should Iran stay in the deal, in your opinion?
Yes, we have decided to stay in the deal, but that may, there will be some end to it if we find that there is no benefit out of the deal. We signed a deal to have benefits out of it, and benefits in terms of trade and business and normal relations. Not only the trade and business have been developed between Iran and European countries, but they are mounting new pressures on Iran on the case of missile technology, on the case of the presence of Iran in the region. Therefore, all of this pressure may lead to stopping to have cooperation on the deal.
President Trump said last year that he's willing to hold talks with President Rouhani without preconditions. The Iranian government, up until this point, have said that they won't do that. But recently, Rouhani said that negotiations would be possible with the U.S. if it repents. Would you advise your president to hold talks with President Trump? And would you advise the supreme leader who has the ultimate say on foreign policy issues to go ahead with the meeting?
Not the current situations, because no one can trust the President of the United States.
So let's say there was a different president. Then would Iran be willing to talk? Then would your advice be, let's talk to the United States?
Oh, it all depends on the future. That is a hypothetical question, and we have to wait and see who is going to win as the President of the United States for next term. Before everything, there should be trust. There should be based on equal footing and equal rights. And that is missing. United States is just putting pressures. And they think that by pressurizing Iran, they can achieve their goals. And this is their mistake. Iran has never submitted to the pressure all through 40 years of its life. We did not submit to the pressures by, Saddam Hussein and those who were supporting Saddam Hussein. We did not submit to the pressures of the United States and others in terms of putting sanctions on Iran. And therefore, that is their mistake. It seems that Americans have been fooled by certain circles that if they put pressure on Iran, Iran would submit.
How would you describe U.S.-Iranian relations as they stand today?
It's very worse. There's no relation, and there's animosity between Iran and the United States. They are using all their instruments to put pressure on Iran. And even Mr. John Bolton said that Iranians would not see their 40th anniversary. This means that they are going to do regime change. And therefore, it's utmost animosity from the side of the United States against Iran.
Is there any way out of this impasse with the United States, in your opinion?
It all depends.
What is the way forward?
If they have to change their policies, they have to come up with a new policy. Unfortunately, the United States is trying to materialize financial imperialism. If in the past imperialism was dependent on arms and wars, today Americans are dependent on financial instruments. They are putting pressures on everyone to put Iran at the corner. But Iran is not going to submit.
President Rouhani, as well as his allies, have really staked their credibility, a lot of people would say, on this nuclear agreement, as well as the economic benefits it was supposed to bring to Iran. So domestically, there's a lot to lose for the current government if the deal collapses or if Iran pulls out of the nuclear agreement. Would that empower hardliners who opposed it from the start?
There are a lot of pressures on the government, naturally, because everyone was expecting that nuclear deal would bring trade and business to Iran, and economic growth would be upgraded. But unfortunately, by the pressure of the Americans, it's not happened, and therefore there are a lot of pressures on the current government.
And now even the supreme leader of Iran acknowledged that the sanctions, the recently imposed US sanctions, are pressuring Iran. So what do you say to the average Iranian who's caught up in this?
They are witnessing this themselves. And they know that the source of these pressures are the United States.
But the economic problems that Iran faces surely are not simply down to the US pressures, because last year we saw protests across cities and towns, and tens of them, in fact, people were protesting over poor living standards. That can't be simply down to the Americans.
Yeah, that was because the, inflation and the change of foreign currencies.
But the IMF is saying that at least 1 in 4 people in Iran can't find work. Unemployment rate is at 12%. Does this all threaten the current leadership? Should it be worried?
Yeah, I don't deny that these are the problems that we are facing in Iran. But one has to look to it that what is the source of problems. The source of these problems is unjustified pressures on the United States.
As the country struggles economically, Dr. Kharazi, Iran is engaged, as we know, in conflicts around the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, as well as in Yemen, spending a lot of money, billions in arms and financing, as well as support. Many people saying, why is Iran spending this money abroad when there are so many economic problems at home?
It is the matter of Iranian security. We rushed to the help of Iraqis and Syrians under their invitation because eventually our security was at stake. If Daesh had succeeded to take over Baghdad and Damascus, they were very close to the Iranian border, and more than that, to keep the status quo in the region and oppose those countries who have tried to destabilize the region.
However, countries accuse Iran of destabilizing the region. The US, even some of your neighbors in this region, say that Iran is sowing discord and confusion around the Middle East. The EU, in a statement this February, expressed concern at Iran's role in growing Middle East tensions, including, it says, support for groups in Syria and Iran's own forces in the country. Do you agree that Iran is complicit in the chaos of these countries?
No, because we have tried to keep the region as it is, to keep the status quo, to support the existing governments. Whomever would try to destabilize and to topple down the governments, those are the parties who have to be questioned.
But you are supporting a Syrian government which the UN accuses of war crimes. And you are supporting the Houthi groups in Yemen, the UN just saying that Iran is financing Houthis through illegal shipments of fuel.
There are a lot of talks and accusations here and there, but this has to be substantiated. The reality is that we oppose intervention of others in any country in the region. Saudi Arabia has intervened in Yemen. Saudi Arabia has intervened in Syria. and we cannot let others to intervene.
Has Iran intervened in Yemen and Syria, and do you at least agree that Iran,
No, we
I'll
have
ask
not
you again, is
intervened.
complicit
No,
in these
no.
wars?
Intervention means that you go to other countries without their invitation. As Americans have intervened in Syria, as Saudi Arabia has intervened, and United Arab Emirates.
The Saudi Arabians will say we were asked by the Yemeni government to come into Yemen.
When Syrian government has asked Iran to come over and help them, doesn't mean intervention. That is supporting the status quo. So it's quite different.
What is Iran's endgame in Syria? We know that there are Iranian advisors on the ground. What is the endgame there?
We are trying our best according to Aslan initiative to have a new constitution, and people of Syria would decide based on the constitution that who would govern them. That is the ultimate game.
President Trump recently said that he'd like to keep American troops in Iraq to, quote, watch Iran. What is your reaction to that?
They have failed in Syria, in fact. And they are giving some excuse that why they are going to leave Syria. They had no choice but to leave. And they would not have any choice to leave Iraq as well, as they have no choice but to leave Afghanistan. Because they have proven that by their presence, nothing they can achieve.
Let me ask you about Israel. And the Secretary of the Iranian Supreme National Security Council said recently that Israel will receive a decisive response if it continues attacks in Syria. Netanyahu recently said that Israel won't let Iran remain in Syria. How do you see those threats from Israel? Is the possibility of a war between Israel and Iran on the table?
If they want to engage war in Iran, certainly Iran would respond. But we are not going to start war against any entity. And, that is their decision. If they want to engage war with Iran, that would be something else.
Last year, the U.S. Secretary of State, he set out 12 demands for inclusion in any new nuclear treaty with Iran. Among them, according to Secretary Pompeos, to end Iran's threatening behavior against its neighbors, some of which are U.S. allies, including Israel. And the Poland-U.S. summit in Warsaw, it's being described in unofficial circles, at least, as being an anti-Iran summit somewhat. Does this all put pressure on Iran on the international arena? Nothing
they can do against Iran. But I believe that one of their main goals is against Russia, because it has been a long time that they wanted to bring their missiles in Poland against Russia. And therefore, it's not only the matter of Iran, it's the matter of new strategy of the United States against Iran, against Russia, against any independent country. You've described the Polish government's hosting of this conference as a disgrace for the European identity. And we know that Iran has summoned Poland's top envoy, cancelled the Polish Film Festival. So this conference must bother Iran somewhat for Iran to take such measures. We have warned them that is a sign of animosity. If anything would came out against, from this conference. And, they know that. Let's look at the GCC for a moment, because countries like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, the UAE, say Iran interferes in other states' affairs. Iran's relations specifically with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain can be described as strained at best. Why do you think that is? Because hegemonic policies of the Saudi Arabian government. They have tried to develop their hegemony not only on Bahrain, on Qatar, on Yemen, and other countries. And the dispute between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates is for the same reason. And they have to stop this hegemonic policy and come up with friendly relations with neighboring countries. Otherwise, there would be severe situations in the region. Speaking of the dispute, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said that the dispute, the rift between Qatar
on one side and Saudi, Bahrain, Egypt and the UAE on the other side was threatening regional unity that's needed to counter Iran. Does the GCC blockade work in favor of Iran?
We are not happy that disputes are developing in the region, because that does not help for the security and development of peace in the region. But this is a matter of fact that out of hegemonic policies of the Saudi Arabian and United Arab Emirates, this dispute has been developed. We are ready to talk to everyone in the region, even Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, all other parties, and we believe eventually that is the final solution for developing peace and security in the region, out of intervention of foreign countries. If we sit together and talk to each other for the benefit of the region, I believe something would come out of it.
Dr. Kharazi, you were foreign minister under President Mohammad Khatami, of course, who was and is supported by a political faction known as the Iranian Reformists. Now, his vision called for more freedom, called for more democracy. Yet today, Iran is ranking 164 out of 180. That's according to Reporters Without Borders on the World Press Freedom Index. In their 2018 report, they say that the state controls news, it controls information, it's been relentless in the past 39 years of its persecution of independent journalists, media, as well as arbitrary arrests. You must be dismayed by all of this.
These ratings are politicized. They are not impartial bodies.
Are you saying that Iran then has a free media?
Iran, compared to many countries, have free media. Iran, compared to many countries around, has been developing socially, economically. For example, girls and ladies have been going to universities, have been taking great responsibilities in Iran, and some impartial body has to rate. Ranking by these organizations are totally politicized.
40 years on from the revolution, do you think that the revolution has achieved its aims, in your opinion?
Revolution has achieved a lot of goals. The most important is to keep the independence of the country and security of the country. Iran is the most secure place in this region. Iran has been developing economically, socially, in terms of social justice, very well. If you compare Iran today with Iran before revolution, you find it in many aspects Iran has been developing. For example, in terms of science and technology, Iran is one of the forerunners of science and technology in the region. Iran is number 1 in the region and number 17 in the world in terms of the number of articles and citations. And in terms of developing its defense needs, Iran has been able to develop all their needs by itself.
What we still find in Iran, though, is that a lot of the wealth is still concentrated in the hands of few people, and that the Revolutionary Guards, for example, have extensive business interests. So that was one of the aims of the revolution. Has that been fulfilled? Has the wealth been redistributed evenly amongst the population?
No, I don't claim that all the aims of Iran after revolution has been achieved. But there has been great developments in Iran in terms of distribution of wealth, in terms of achieving rural developments, in terms of building dams, in terms of roads, transportation. And the importance of that is that all of these have been happened without support of foreigners. It has been based on self-reliance by the resources that we have internally. That is very important. That is why Iran is inspiring. And many nations around us look to Iran as an independent and as an independent entity that without support of foreigners, and even in the case of animosity of others against Iran, in terms of sanctions, Iran has been able to develop. And therefore, that is the source of inspiration and the source of influence in the region. If our enemies are talking about influence of Iran in the region, that is not because we have intervened in other countries. That is because we have been inspiring.
Let me finally ask you, what is your hope for Iran?
To have a good life, to develop further, to keep with our independence and integrity, and to be proud that after 40 years of revolution, we have been moving, we have been trying to best to develop our science and technology, and so that's the source of our pride.
Dr. Kamal Kharazi, advisor to Iran's supreme leader on foreign policy and former foreign minister, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Good, welcome.